Hey, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Wow. I appreciate that. A standing ovation at the Constitution Center, that's like a dream come true for me. Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm thrilled and delighted to be with everybody today. I wish I knew everybody, but I'm delighted to meet you guys, and I'm going to try to stay for the next panel. Unfortunately, my schedule's kind of crazy. Back when I was an academic, I lived for conferences like this, and I would not miss a single panel, and I would spend weeks getting ready with a paper rather than trying to scribble out my thoughts on the Amtrak. The truth is that I've been puzzling over the questions presented at this conference for a few weeks, ever since I had the chance to start to think about it. And there are some fascinating philosophical puzzles that are created by the question here. And so I just want to lay my cards on the table that I arrive with a lot more questions than I do answers. And so I came to get some answers, and I hope at least when the Brennan Center, I think this is going to be published as some kind of law review symposium. Is that right? I hope it will. Well, anyway, I hope somebody will send me the answers when it's all over, whether it's published or not. I'm always delighted here to be at the National Constitution Center with my friend Jeff Rosen, the president. He's someplace out there, I think. I saw him briefly. Thanks for doing such a great job for the Constitution Center, for Philadelphia, for America, in creating this incredible space, this incredible forum and think tank about the Constitution with its remarkable feng shui for constitutional ideas and values coursing through the place. And thank you for arranging for such beautiful weather in Philadelphia, too. I mean, it's a lot hotter down in Washington, although there it's not just the heat, it's the stupidity, as you know. When I started thinking about the provocative premise of this conversation, I started by asking myself whether the Articles of Confederation are relevant at all to the interpretation of the Constitution, as opposed to its historical appearance and understanding. Obviously, it's part of the dynamics of history, but is it relevant to what judges and lawyers do? Is it relevant to the interpretation of the Constitution? After all, the Constitution is supposed to be a complete and self-contained document unto itself, and we like to think that the answers lie within the Constitution, or to the extent we go outside of it to the Articles of Confederation or the Articles of Association or the Declaration of Independence or the original state constitutions or the Magna Carta or any other written text, are we essentially fishing for evidence that's going to support whatever particular interpretation that we want to torture out of the Constitution or we want to find there? Or does it actually help us arrive at some kind of objective, determinate meaning of the Constitution? And that's hard to know. It's hard to see exactly. I guess the best argument for that kind of extrinsic textual evidence usually comes from a dictionary. That was certainly Justice Scalia's claim, that if you looked at the dictionary that was in use at the time that a certain constitutional provision was written or a constitutional amendment was added, that would give you a sense of the original understanding of the language and therefore an original understanding of the text as adopted. If you go outside of that to other legal documents, even those in the chain of political custody of the United States, like the Articles of Association, Articles of Confederation, there are a lot of problems that come up. If we're looking for a word that was originally there that was omitted, does that indicate a kind of rebellion against that word, a departure from that word? Or does it indicate that that word or the concept was just taken for granted and should be assimilated into the Constitution? And so you see when you're in an actual case or controversy how an omission can be played one way or the other. Even with the continuation of particular language from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution, the continuity of words, which might seem to indicate a continuity of legality, could be altered according to the context within which the language appears now in the Constitution. Does the context actually alter that original meaning? Again, suggesting that maybe the meanings are ultimately opaque and inscrutable and indeterminate, and that juxtaposing the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution doesn't necessarily give you much analytical mileage, and rather generates competing arguments that have a certain kind of structure to them, but that ultimately it doesn't answer the question for you. And so then I began to think, okay, well, maybe the utility of the Articles of Confederation is not so much in terms of a specific interpretive methodology or technique, but becomes useful for us in terms of thinking about the whole structure of the government that was put into place. And so that, I think, may give us some more fruitful lines of inquiry. And again, this is at a more abstract or conceptual level, but it's still rooted in the language of the different documents. So the big difference that I can find, well, before I get to the big one, let's take this medium-sized difference. There's no president in the Articles of Confederation. There is a president in the Constitution. Now, what does that indicate? From a pro-presidential line of argumentation, it would suggest, therefore, we knew we needed a president, and the president's powers should be interpreted in a robust way through the prism of the appearance of Article 2 in the Constitution. Or, alternatively, somebody more closely identified with Article 1, like me, a member of Congress, might say, well, the presidency was added only as a matter of necessity. The presidency was still subordinated to Congress. After all, Congress is in Article 1, which sets forth all of the powers of the Congress. It appears right after the preamble of the Constitution. Even when you get to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, and all other powers necessary and proper to the execution of the foregoing powers, the so-called sweeping clause, which sweeps in all other kinds of powers. And then you get to Article 2, 4 short paragraphs. The most important of them may be a president shall be impeached for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And what is the core job of the president through the prism of Article 1 power, and there not even having been a president in the Articles of Confederation? Well, after Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, not Commander-in-Chief, by the way, of the nation, not Commander-in-Chief of the government, but commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy in times of actual conflict. What's the core job of the president after that? Well, it's to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, right? We've come a long way from those days, right? Take care that the laws are faithfully executed. So from that perspective, the appearance of the presidency is indeed to instill efficiency and vigor and energy in the implementation of the laws adopted by the representatives of the people, but nothing more than that. And I don't know that the existence of the Articles of Confederation and the non-existence of a president in the Articles of Confederation tells you much more, right? Wittgenstein says that language must speak for itself. And so you have to look to what the language actually says in Article 2, and we have to try to figure it out from there. So I was feeling a little dispirited, a little deflated about what the importation of the Articles of Confederation might mean generally for the conversation, except that I came to what I thought was kind of the big structural difference, which might give us a different gaze or perspective for reading the Constitution. And that is the fact that the Articles of Confederation were very treaty-like. They were very much a treaty or an agreement among the states coming together. So if it had been written in an exactly parallel way, it would have started off, "We the states." And it was all about the powers and the prerogatives of the states and how the states remain sovereign and so on. And it was all about keeping state power from this league of states that might get together, this confederation, and do something different. But the shift over to the Constitution is dramatic in terms of thinking about constitutional sovereignty, because it does begin with those three magic words, the most beautiful words in the Constitution. Maybe the three most beautiful words in the English language, "We the people." So it rooted the whole constitutional experiment in this idea of popular sovereignty, the sovereignty of the people. Now, if you think of it like a political scientist would, that's of course mitigated or complicated by virtue of the different ways in which states do have their own sovereignty within our constitutional regime and structure. But nonetheless, I think that "We the people" gives us the proper gaze and perspective to read the other provisions of the Constitution. Now, I took one, which is of some contemporary, indeed I should say some daily significance today, which is the Emoluments Clause, right? Now, the Emoluments Clause actually exists in the Articles of Confederation, if you guys have been studying your Articles of Confederation. And it's in Article 6, and it says, "No state without the consent of the United States in Congress assembled shall send any embassy to or receive any embassy from or enter into any conference, agreement, alliance, or treaty with any king, prince, or state, nor shall any person holding any office of profit or trust under the United States or any of them, except of any present emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state, nor shall the United States in Congress assembled or any of them grant any title of nobility." Okay, it's very similar to the comparable paragraph that we get in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8. But it differs in some ways which I think go to this question of who's the sovereign. So here's what our paragraph says in the Constitution. "No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of Congress, except of any present emolument, office, or trust, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state." All right, so when I bear down on that, what do I see? The Emoluments Clause, the Foreign Emoluments Clause, in the original Articles of Confederation was really about making sure that no state would stab the Treaty of States, the Confederation of States, in the back by making deals with foreign princes, kings, and governments. So it was about maintaining that horizontal unity of the states against somebody breaching it by going and cutting a deal with the King of England or somebody in France or what have you. Now, if you read our clause through the prism of popular sovereignty, it looks much more to me like it's about not allowing the president or members of Congress or anybody else holding an office of profit or trust under the United States from breaching fiduciary duty with the people, right? So no title of nobility shall be granted. We've got no kings here. We have no princes. We have no queens. We have no czars. We have no emperors. And nobody holding an office of federal profit or trust shall, without the consent of the Congress, that's introduced, that didn't exist in the Articles of Confederation original, except of any present emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. We don't want the president or the Congress to be corrupted by foreign money, presents, offices, titles, or jet planes, okay? Those of us who aspire and attain to public office under our Constitution are nothing but the servants of the people. And the moment that somebody gets into office and begins to think that he or she has or deserves or commands a title of nobility, of king or prince or czar or emperor or what have you, that is the moment to evict, eject, reject, try, impeach, convict, and start all over again. And that's where I think the neighborhood of surrounding principles becomes so important, and why ultimately, why these little clues may have some significance if you're lucky. Every once in a while you can find a diamond in the rough perhaps, but generally, I'm kind of with Wittgenstein on this, language must speak for itself. And the fact that we do have an impeachment clause is enormously telling. Sometimes my colleagues, not just across the aisle, but sometimes my best friends in Congress, like Nancy Pelosi, they'll get up and they restate this fifth grade dogma that we have three co-equal branches of government. Well, first of all, co-equal is not even a word, okay? That's the first problem with that claim. The second is, why did James Madison say in the Federalist Papers that Congress is the predominant branch? Well, we just had a revolution against monarchy. We overthrew a king. The framers understood very well how a president, one chief executive, could come to think that he or she is the smartest person in the world and should dictate to everybody else. So yes, I think we were much more afraid of a president becoming a king than a Congress becoming a group of kings or nobles, because after all, we have the separation of powers. Now, you know, the separation of powers was used once. That phrase was used once in the Federalist Papers, and it was not about the separation between the legislative and the executive, or the executive and the judicial and legislative. It was between the House and the Senate. It was bicameralism that separation of powers referred to. So sure, there's a checking and a balancing of all of these different institutional points of power within our regime. But I think that we began with the proper fear of a president becoming a mad king, like King George was. And that's why we have so many provisions hemming that in. By the way, not just the Foreign Emoluments Clause, but the Domestic Emoluments Clause. The Domestic Emoluments Clause says the president is limited to his salary in office and may receive no other emoluments, payments of any kind, whatever, from the federal government itself, which includes the Secret Service, which includes the Department of Commerce, the Department of State, all of these agencies and departments which spent millions of dollars during the first Trump administration, and we don't have any accounting now of what is going on yet. But of course, we're on to bigger and better things because the millions of dollars that flowed in from China and Saudi Arabia and Indonesia and United Arab Emirates and the Secret Service and the Department of State and the White House to the Trump hotels and the Trump International Hotel in Washington, which I call the Washington Emolument, and to all of the golf courses and so on. All of that is small potatoes compared to the vast new channel for foreign government money flowing in to the White House today through cryptocurrency, which of course is another conference of its own sometime. But that, the development of the presidential meme coin and cryptocurrency means that foreign states and powers can, without any tracing at all, dump not just millions or tens of millions, but hundreds of millions or billions of dollars into the presidency without any regulation, without any legislation, without any detection at all. Well, I'm straying a little bit too far right now from the Articles of Confederation. But I do believe that this is a useful exercise in terms of us thinking about what interpretive mileage there can be in specific cases, but even more importantly, in terms of the character of the different political regimes and governments that were created by the Articles of Confederation, or association for that matter, and by the Constitution. And I do believe that we have a government that was created for the people and by the people, and all of us who hold office are servants of the people. The Constitution is designed in that way. The people have the freedom of speech and the freedom of press and the right to petition government for redress of grievances, the right to assemble. All of those things establish the active political sovereignty of the people over the government. And that's what we need to hang on to at a time when all of those things are under attack, as well as the separation of church and state. Maybe I'll close with that, because I don't know that that appears in the Articles, but it definitely appears in the Constitution. And sometimes I think that was the great breakthrough of the American Constitution. Our founders were Enlightenment liberals who broke from centuries of religious warfare between the Protestants and the Christians in Europe, and holy crusades and inquisition and witchcraft trials, and they wanted to put all of that behind us and to say that the freedom of worship and belief was something that would be left to each person and his or her God, as Madison put it in his famous remonstrance against religious taxation in Virginia. And government would be a place where we would try to base things on facts and data and empirical inquiry and reason. So I'll leave you with the words of some of the great democracy champions that I've held very close to my heart through this period. One, the great Thomas Jefferson, filled with contradictions, of course, but somebody who was an amazing champion of the First Amendment and free speech and democracy. And during the period of the Alien and Sedition Acts, and specifically 1798, the Alien Enemies Act, which has come back into vogue recently, Jefferson got a letter from a friend of his named John Taylor, who was complaining about the condition of the country. And he was saying, well, is this the same country where we just overthrew the kings and queens, and now we're rounding up all of the dangerous subversive Frenchmen and kicking them out of the country and arresting newspaper editors in Vermont and everything? And Jefferson wrote back, he said, "A little patience and the reign of witches shall pass over. Their spells dissolve, and the people recovering their true sight restore their government to its true principles. In the meantime, we're suffering all the horrors and malignities of the current period. But if the game runs against us sometimes at home, as it will, we must have patience, because this is a game where principles are at stake." There's a message to you from Jefferson in the 18th century. I'll quote one of my heroes from the 19th century, the great Frederick Douglass, who was born about half hour from my house at the Wye River plantation into slavery. And he escaped from slavery to become our great freedom fighter through the Civil War. and the Reconstruction. And he was someone who never gave up on the Constitution, even when other abolitionists had. And even when other abolitionists like Wendell Phillips were burning the Constitution, he said no. The way that he read it, the Constitution was a charter of freedom that forecast the end of slavery in a number of different ways and was on the march towards a more perfect union. But anyway, Douglass said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. And the struggle may be moral, it may be physical, it may be moral and physical, but there must be struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. And I'll leave you finally with the words of the great Tom Paine, you know, who got over here in 1774, 2 years before the American Revolution. He fell in love with the promise of America. He said, if this nation lives up to its values and ideals, it will become an asylum to humanity, he said. Not an insane asylum, mind you. An asylum to humanity, a place of refuge for people seeking freedom from political and religious and intellectual persecution all over the world. And he wrote the pamphlet that ignited the American Revolution, Common Sense, by which he meant all of us, if we're lucky, have 5 senses and a 6th sense, a common sense, a sense we have in common if we're willing to reason together without dogma and superstition. But anyway, that was a tough year, 1776. I'm reading an interesting book about that right now by the Texas historian H.W. Brands, the book is called The First Civil War. And it's about how the American Revolution was really a civil war, a war at home, because half of the people were running around saying, you can't beat the greatest empire that ever existed. You can't dethrone the kings and the queens and the emperors and the czars. For all of human history, people have lived under people like Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban and Kim Jong-un. That's the fate of humanity. And half of the people said, no, let's give this a try. Let's pledge to ourselves our sacred honor, our property, our very lives, in order to establish government that rests on the consent of the governed in pursuit of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the unalienable rights of the people, the protection of the rights of the people, all of whom we would interpret them to be saying, at least today, are born equal. But anyway, so Paine wanted to write a pamphlet to give people some hope, some courage, to embolden them during a very dark period. And he wrote this beautiful pamphlet called The American Crisis. And I'm going to just quote a little passage for you, but I want to update it pursuant to strict instructions from Nancy Pelosi, because she said that Paine was a feminist, and that he was. He wouldn't mind. So, and he was fighting for women's voting rights in the 18th century. But anyway, Paine said, these are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause in their country. But everyone that stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. So let's make that victory ours in our century. Thank you very much, and thank you, Brennan Center, and thank you, Constitution Center.